He will pay dearly for what he's done to me, vows a black woman, her voice steady with resolve. A subway janitor, she endures daily slights, sneers about her lowly job, whispers of not belonging in her husband's polished world, and the sting of racial and class prejudice. Returning home early from a minor surgery, hospital bracelet still on her wrist, she opens her bedroom door to a shattering sight. Her husband, a successful white lawyer, entangled with his lover on their marital bed, a space once filled with shared dreams. Instead of screaming, she retreats to the kitchen, mechanically brewing coffee to anchor her reeling mind, aware of months of lies about late meetings and weekend trips. Gazing into a mirror, exhaustion meets defiance in her eyes. This isn't the end, it's the start of a game. Will her cunning unravel his deceit? Can justice rise from betrayal? Subscribe to our channel for the latest chapters and share where you're listening from. Her story of resilience awaits, promising a victory you won't want to miss. Kemi Afolabi pushed open the front door of her modest home in a middle-class neighborhood of a sprawling American city, her hospital slippers whispering against the hardwood floor. The plastic bracelet from her recent surgery clung to her wrist, a stark reminder of the minor procedure that had kept her away for 2 days. At 29, Kemi, a black woman who worked tirelessly cleaning subway cars, was used to the grind of her job, the late-night shifts, the grime under her nails, the ache in her bones. But nothing could have prepared her for the sight awaiting her upstairs. She had been released a day early, eager to surprise her husband, Daniel Carter, a successful white lawyer whose charm and ambition had once swept her off her feet during their college days. Now as she climbed the stairs, the weight of her hospital bag felt lighter than the dread pooling in her chest. The neighborhood had never fully embraced Kemi. Behind their manicured lawns and polite smiles, neighbors whispered about her lowly job, their words laced with condescension. "The black janitor lady," they'd murmur at block parties, or "Daniel's wife must be great at scrubbing floors." At social gatherings hosted by Daniel's law firm colleagues, she overheard remarks like, "He picked someone different," their eyes flickering over her with a mix of pity and judgment. The barbs stung, not just for their dismissal of her work, but for the way they tied her worth to her race and occupation, as if she were an anomaly in Daniel's polished world. Kemi had learned to swallow the hurt, to smile through the slights, but each one left a mark, like invisible scars etched beneath her skin. She reached the top of the stairs, her breath shallow from the climb and the lingering soreness of her surgery. The bedroom door was slightly ajar, a sliver of light spilling into the hallway. This room, their sanctuary, held memories of late-night talks about starting a family, of laughter shared under the soft glow of the bedside lamp Kemi had chosen for their first anniversary. The quilt on the bed, a patchwork of blues and greens, was a gift from her late grandmother, a symbol of the dreams they'd stitched together over 7 years of marriage. Kemi pushed the door open, expecting to find Daniel napping or working on his laptop. Instead, her world fractured. There, on their marital bed, Daniel was entwined with a woman Kemi didn't recognize. Rachel Brooks, as she'd later learn, a colleague from his firm. Their bodies moved with a familiarity that pierced Kemi's heart. Rachel's pale arms were wrapped around Daniel's back, her blonde hair splayed across the pillow Kemi had fluffed that morning before her hospital stay. The air was thick with a perfume Kemi didn't own, sharp and floral, mingling with the scent of betrayal. Daniel's rhythm, once reserved for her, now belonged to this stranger in the space where they'd planned their future. They were oblivious to Kemi's presence, too consumed by their passion to notice the hospital bracelet glinting on her wrist or the soft creak of the floor beneath her feet. The sight should have broken her. 7 years of trust, of building a life together, shattered in a single moment. Her pulse thundered in her ears, urging her to scream, to hurl accusations, to collapse under the weight of the betrayal. But Kemi Afolabi was not one to crumble. Something cold and resolute settled in her chest, a steel forged from years of enduring whispered slurs and sidelong glances. She stepped back silently, her slippers noiseless on the hardwood, and closed the door with a soft click. The sounds from the bedroom, Rachel's gasps, Daniel's murmurs, followed her down the stairs, each one a dagger twisting deeper. In the kitchen, Kemi moved on autopilot. She filled the coffee maker with water, a familiar ritual that grounded her as her mind raced. The machine, a sleek stainless steel model Daniel had gifted her for their 5th anniversary, hummed to life. As the aroma of brewing coffee filled the room, Kemi's thoughts sharpened. Daniel's lies began to unravel in her mind. The late meetings that kept him out past midnight, the weekend conferences he claimed were essential for his career. How many times had he kissed her goodbye, his briefcase in hand, only to spend those hours with Rachel? How long had he been weaving this web of deceit? The questions multiplied, each one fueling a quiet fury that burned hotter than her pain. She stood at the counter, gripping the edge as the coffee dripped. The kitchen window reflected her image. Tired eyes, her natural hair pulled into a loose bun, her skin still radiant despite the hospital's fluorescent lights. At 29, Kemi was striking, her strength evident in the set of her jaw. But in this moment, she felt the weight of every slight she'd endured. Daniel's wife probably just knows how to clean house, right? A neighbor had once said at a barbecue, her smile as sharp as a blade. Another time at a firm event, a colleague had remarked, "You must be so proud to support his success," as if Kemi's labor, her sacrifices, were invisible. The world saw her as less educated, less refined, less worthy because of her job and her blackness. But Kemi knew better. She was more than their assumptions, and she would prove it. The sounds from upstairs grew louder, a cruel reminder of the scene she'd witnessed. Kemi poured herself a cup of coffee, the warmth of the mug steadying her trembling hands. She wouldn't cry. She wouldn't scream. Those reactions were what Daniel might expect, what the world might expect from a woman like her. Instead, she would think, plan, and act. She moved to the living room, settling on the couch with her coffee, her hospital bag at her feet. The room felt foreign now, tainted by the betrayal upstairs, but it was also where she would begin to reclaim her power. Kemi caught her reflection in a small mirror on the coffee table. The woman staring back was exhausted, her eyes shadowed from the surgery and the shock, but there was a spark of something new. Defiance. She leaned closer, her voice a whisper, barely audible over the distant noises from the bedroom. "This isn't the end," she told herself, her words firm with conviction. "This is the start of a game." And then, with a resolve that burned brighter than her pain, she added, "He will pay dearly for what he's done to me." The vow settled into her bones, a promise not of revenge, but of justice. Kemi Afolabi, the subway janitor dismissed by those around her, was no longer just a wife. She was a player in a game her husband didn't yet know he was losing. Kemi Afolabi sat in her living room, the weight of her vow. "He will pay dearly for what he's done to me," still burning in her chest. The coffee mug in her hands had gone cold, but its bitter scent anchored her resolve. The house, once a haven of shared dreams, now felt like a stage for Daniel's deception, each corner hiding another lie. She couldn't stay frozen in shock. She needed allies, a plan, and the strength to turn betrayal into justice. Kemi set the mug down, her hospital bracelet catching the light, and reached for her phone. She dialed 2 numbers. Her sister Amara, a nurse whose own battles with prejudice had forged an unbreakable spirit, and Lydia, her best friend and a fierce advocate for the Black community. They were her lifeline, the ones who would help her fight back. Amar arrived first, her scrub still creased from a long shift at the city hospital. At 32, she carried the quiet strength of someone who'd faced down sneers from colleagues who questioned her competence because of her skin. "You're not breaking," Amara said, her voice firm as she sat across from Kemi at the kitchen table. "You're going to outsmart him. Stay calm, stay sharp, and don't let him see you flinch." Her advice was rooted in experience, years of navigating a system that dismissed her as just another Black nurse, despite her skill. Kemi nodded, her sister's words grounding her like the coffee had the day before. Amara's pragmatism was exactly what she needed to channel her fury into a strategy. Lydia burst through the door an hour later, her energy as vibrant as the protest signs she carried at community rallies. A social activist with a knack for uncovering truths, Lydia had spent years fighting for justice in their city's marginalized neighborhoods. "We're not just dealing with a cheating husband," she declared, pulling out her laptop. "We're going to dig into this woman and his lies. Let's see what they're hiding." Lydia's fingers flew across the keyboard, her eyes narrowing as she scrolled through social media. She proposed investigating Rachel Brooks, Daniel's lover and colleague at his law firm, whose online presence might reveal the extent of their affair. Kemi felt a spark of hope. With Amara's steady guidance and Lydia's relentless drive, she wasn't alone in this war. Lydia's search quickly bore fruit. Rachel's social media was a gallery of curated excess. Photos of her at upscale restaurants, sipping wine in candlelit booths, or posing against city skylines at luxury hotels. The timestamps aligned suspiciously with Daniel's business trips and late meetings. One post showed Rachel at a rooftop bar, her smile radiant under string lights, captioned, "Celebrating a big win with my favorite person." Kemi's stomach twisted. She recognized the bar as one Daniel had claimed to visit for a client dinner. "He's been funding this," Lydia said, her voice tight with anger. "And she's flaunting it like a trophy." The betrayal cut deeper, but Kemi's resolve hardened. She needed hard evidence, not just screenshots, to make Daniel pay. That evening, while Daniel was out on another late meeting, Kemi slipped into his home office. The room with its polished desk and framed law degree was a shrine to his ambition, a world where Kemi, the subway janitor, felt increasingly out of place. She rifled through his files, her hands steady despite the risk. Tucked in a drawer, she found a folder labeled Financials. Inside were loan documents, each bearing her name in a signature that wasn't hers. The amounts were staggering, tens of thousands in loans she'd never agreed to, tied to properties and investments she knew nothing about. Her heart raced as she photographed each page with her phone, careful to leave no trace. Daniel had forged her signature, exploiting her trust in her identity. The discovery was a gut punch, but worse was an email Kemi found on Daniel's open laptop, sent to Rachel. "She's clueless, signs anything I put in front of her. Doesn't know better." The words seared into her, not just for their betrayal, but for their disdain. Daniel saw her as ignorant, a stereotype rooted in her race and her job, a black woman he assumed lacked the savvy to question him. The insult fueled her determination. She forwarded the email to her private account, deleted her tracks, and left the office as she'd found it. Daniel's arrogance would be his undoing. The next day, Kemi attended a law firm cocktail party with Daniel, playing the role of the dutiful wife to avoid suspicion. The room buzzed with lawyers in tailored suits, their spouses dripping in jewelry, their glances at Kemi laced with pity. "Poor Mrs. Carter," one whispered to another. "She must feel so out of place here." Another remarked, "Daniel's so generous to stay with someone so unpolished." The words, veiled as compliments, were knives cutting at her race and her occupation. Kemi smiled through it, her composure a shield, but each slight added weight to her mission. She excused herself early, claiming fatigue from her surgery, and returned home to plan her next move. Amara and Lydia met her that night, their faces grim as Kemi shared the loan documents in the email. "He's not just cheating," Lydia said, her voice low with fury. "He's stealing your future." Amara, ever the strategist, urged caution. "We need more than this to nail him. The courts won't accept evidence you got by sneaking around." Lydia agreed, suggesting they focus on Rachel's public trail. Her social media was a goldmine of carelessness. Kemi felt the weight of their support, a lifeline pulling her from despair to action. The turning point came when Kemi met Jordan Williams, a black female attorney renowned for her tenacity in the courtroom. Jordan's office, perched high in a downtown skyscraper, was a stark contrast to Kemi's subway world, but her presence was warm, commanding respect. "You've got to start," Jordan said, reviewing the photos of the loan documents. "But anything obtained illegally won't hold up in court. You need to be smarter than him. Play the naive wife, keep him off guard, and let me guide you to legal evidence." Her eyes, sharp with understanding, met Kemi's. "He thinks you're weak because of who you are. Use that against him." Jordan's plan was clear. Kemi would maintain her facade, attending Daniel's events, asking innocent questions about his work, and documenting his lies without breaking the law. Every late meeting he claimed, every conference he attended, would be cross-checked with Rachel's posts and public records. Kemi left the office with a new sense of purpose, her allies forming a fortress around her. She wasn't just fighting for herself anymore. She was fighting for the woman they underestimated, the black janitor they dismissed. This was her game now, and she would play it to win. Kemi Afolabi left Jordan Williams' office with a fire in her chest, her resolve to outsmart Daniel Carter, now a carefully honed blade. The lawyer's words, "He thinks you're weak because of who you are. Use that against him," echoed in her mind as she stepped into the evening air, the city's skyline a glittering reminder of the world Daniel coveted. She would play the naive wife, just as Jordan advised, but every step she took was a move in a larger game. The betrayal she'd uncovered wasn't just personal anymore. It was a wound that could scar her entire community. Kemi knew she needed more than anger. She needed evidence, allies, and the courage to face the man Daniel had become. As she drove home, the hospital bracelet still on her wrist, she steeled herself for the next phase of her fight, one that would demand every ounce of her cunning. Back at home, Kemi maintained her facade, greeting Daniel with a tired smile when he returned from another late meeting. His charm, once so disarming, now felt like a mask, his kisses perfunctory, as he muttered about a tough day at the firm. "You should rest, honey," he said, his voice dripping with false concern. Kemi nodded, claiming post-surgery fatigue, and encouraged him to attend a client dinner the next evening. "You've been working so hard," she said, her tone soft but her eyes sharp, noting the flicker of relief in his expression. Each absence gave her time to dig deeper, to unravel the secrets he thought were safely hidden. As Daniel left for his supposed meeting, Kemi called Lydia, her best friend and a social activist whose network in the black community was unmatched. Lydia arrived with a stack of notes and a fierce determination. "I've been talking to folks in the community," she said, spreading papers across Kemi's dining table. "Your husband's been dipping his hands where they don't belong." Through her connections, Lydia had uncovered a disturbing truth. Daniel had been siphoning funds from a community trust meant to support immigrants, a program that provided small grants to families struggling to rebuild their lives. One victim was Mrs. Johnson, a black widow in her late 60s who lived 3 blocks away. She relied on the trust's modest stipend to cover medical bills and rent since her husband's passing. "She trusted Daniel because he's married to you," Lydia said, her voice heavy. "She thought he was one of us." Kemi's heart sank as Lydia recounted Mrs. Johnson's story. The older woman had shared how Daniel visited her home, offering financial advice with a warm smile. "People like you should trust me," he told her, his tone patronizing, "because I understand your community better than she does." The she was Kemi, his words a subtle jab at her blackness, implying his superiority as a white lawyer navigating their world. The remark stung, not just for its betrayal but for its assumption that Kemi, a black woman, was somehow less capable of understanding her people. Mrs. Johnson had believed him, handing over her trust only to find her stipend slashed, her savings drained by Daniel's quiet theft. Kemi's fight was no longer just about her marriage. It was about protecting those who had been exploited under the guise of trust. The revelation shifted something in Kemi. She thought back to her college days with Daniel, when they were both broke students dreaming of a future together. He'd loved her then, or so she thought, her laughter, her resilience, the way she held her own in debates. But as his career soared, landing him a corner office at a prestigious law firm, he began to see her differently. At firm events, she noticed his discomfort when introducing her as his wife, the subway janitor. "My better half," he'd say with a tight smile, while colleagues whispered, "He could have done better," their words heavy with judgment about her race and job. Daniel's ambition had morphed into a hunger for a refined image, one that aligned with the elite white circles he now chased. Kemi, with her work-worn hands and unapologetic blackness, had become a liability in his eyes. Determined to build her case, Kemi waited for Daniel's next absence. A weekend conference he claimed was critical for a big case. As his car pulled out of the driveway, she slipped into his home office, her pulse steady despite the risk. The room was a testament to his success. Leather-bound books, a gleaming desk, a photo of them at their wedding tucked away in a corner, as if an afterthought. She powered on his laptop, guessing his password from years of shared routines. Among his files, she found a folder labeled Trust Accounts. Inside were spreadsheets detailing transfers from the community trust to a personal account in Daniel's name. The sums were staggering, thousands diverted over months. Each transaction a betrayal of the families who relied on those funds. Kemi photographed every document, her hands steady as she cataloged the evidence, careful to leave no trace of her search. The weight of Daniel's actions pressed on her. This wasn't just about Rachel or the forged loans. It was about a man who had shed his principles for greed and status. Kemi recalled a moment at a firm dinner when a partner had clapped Daniel on the back saying, "You're one of us now," his eyes sliding past Kemi as if she were invisible. Daniel had laughed, basking in the approval, while Kemi stood silently, her presence reduced to a footnote in his climb. Now seeing the numbers on his screen, she understood. He was willing to steal from the vulnerable to secure his place in that world, a world that saw her as less than. Kemi shared her findings with Lydia and Amara over coffee the next morning. Amara's eyes darkened as she scanned the photos. "He's not just hurting you," she said. "He's hurting people who can't afford to lose." Lydia nodded, her activist instincts kicking in. "We need to protect Mrs. Johnson and the others. This is bigger than your marriage now." Their words solidified Kemi's purpose. She wasn't just fighting for herself. She was fighting for her community, for the people Daniel had dismissed as easily as he'd dismissed her. As the day ended, Kemi stood alone in her kitchen, the same room where she'd first grappled with Daniel's betrayal. The man she loved in college, the one who'd shared her dreams under starlit campus nights, was gone, replaced by someone who saw her as a burden. Her blackness, a flaw to be erased. The pain of that truth cut deep, but it also clarified her path. "He chose this road," she whispered to herself, her voice steady with conviction. "Now it's my turn to choose mine." Kemi Afolabi stood in her kitchen, the echo of her vow. "He chose this road. Now it's my turn to choose mine," still ringing in her ears. The weight of Daniel's betrayal, now layered with his theft from their community, had transformed her pain into purpose. She wasn't just fighting for herself anymore. She was fighting for Mrs. Johnson, for the immigrants whose trust Daniel had exploited, for every person he'd dismissed in his climb to power. With Jordan Williams's legal expertise, Amara's steady guidance, and Lydia's relentless pursuit of truth, Kemi was building a case to bring him down. The hospital bracelet on her wrist, a lingering reminder of her vulnerability, felt like a badge of resilience now. She was ready to turn Daniel's arrogance into his downfall, and the battlefield would be a glitzy gala where he least expected her to strike. Kemi met Lydia at a quiet diner, away from prying eyes. Lydia, her activist fire undimmed, slid a USB drive across the table. "This is big," she said, her voice low. Through her network, Lydia had contacted a former assistant at Daniel's law firm, a young woman named Claire, who'd grown disillusioned with the firm's cutthroat culture. Claire had access to internal servers and had quietly copied emails between Daniel and Rachel Brooks, his lover and accomplice. The emails were damning, Rachel urging Daniel to funnel community trust funds into a hidden account, her words cold and calculated. "The trust is a gold mine," one message read. "No one checks those accounts. Move the money now, and we're set." Kemi's jaw tightened as she read, the betrayal cutting deeper. Rachel wasn't just a mistress. She was a co-conspirator, profiting from the pain of people like Mrs. Johnson. Claire's courage gave Kemi a legal lifeline. Unlike the documents Kemi had photographed in Daniel's office, these emails were obtained lawfully, admissible in court. "Claire's willing to testify," Lydia added, "but she's scared. Daniel's got a lot of pull at the firm." Kemi nodded, her mind racing. She needed to protect Claire's evidence while keeping Daniel in the dark. Lydia suggested cross-referencing Rachel's social media with the email dates, building a timeline of their scheme. Rachel's posts, glossy photos at high-end venues, matched the periods when trust funds went missing, painting a picture of greed funded by stolen dreams. Kemi saved every screenshot, her resolve hardening with each piece of evidence. Jordan Williams called Kemi into her office the next day, the city skyline framing her like a general preparing for battle. "We've got a solid foundation," Jordan said, reviewing the emails and screenshots. "But we need to hit him where it hurts, publicly and legally." She proposed a bold plan: confront Daniel at the law firm's annual charity gala, where he was set to deliver a keynote speech. The event, attended by the city's elite, would be the perfect stage to expose his hypocrisy. "You'll be there as his wife," Jordan explained, her eyes sharp. "Ask innocent questions during his speech, plant seeds of doubt. Then I'll step in with the evidence." Kemi felt a thrill of anticipation. The gala would be her moment to flip the script, to show Daniel and his world that she was no longer invisible. To prepare, Kemi leaned into her role as the unsuspecting wife. She cooked Daniel's favorite meals, asked about his work with feigned curiosity, and smiled through his lies about client meetings. Each performance was a masterclass in restraint, her heart pounding as she noted his every slip. Vague answers about his schedule, a nervous glance when she mentioned the community trust. At a firm dinner, she overheard a partner murmur, "It's sweet how Daniel keeps her around," the words dripping with condescension, as if Kemi's presence was an act of charity. Another guest whispered, "She's so manual labor," her job and race reducing her to a stereotype. Kemi let the slights roll off, storing them as fuel. They thought her weak, but she was crafting a trap. Beyond strategy, Kemi focused on herself, reclaiming the confidence Daniel's betrayal had chipped away. She joined a support group for Black women, a space where she could breathe without judgment. One evening, a woman named Tanya shared her story. Her white husband had called her just a factory worker, dismissing her labor as beneath him, echoing Daniel's disdain for Kemi's subway job. "They think our work makes us less," Tanya said, her voice thick with pain. The group's stories of being undervalued, stereotyped, erased, mirrored Kemi's own. She left each meeting stronger, her sense of self growing. She bought a new dress for the gala, a sleek navy number that hugged her curves, and started morning jogs, her body reclaiming its strength post-surgery. The mirror no longer showed a tired woman. It reflected a warrior. Kemi met Amara for coffee, sharing Jordan's gala plan. Amara, ever the pragmatist, warned her about the emotional toll. "You're walking into a lion's den," she said, her nurse's calm masking her worry. "Those people will look down on you, but you're stronger than their judgment." Kemi nodded, her sister's faith bolstering her. Amara helped her rehearse questions for the gala, simple inquiries about Daniel's charitable work that would rattle him without tipping her hand. Lydia, meanwhile, dug deeper into Rachel's digital trail, uncovering posts that flaunted gifts, a diamond bracelet, a designer bag, likely bought with stolen funds. "She's not just in on it," Lydia said. "She's living large off it." The evidence piled up, each piece a brick in the wall Kemi was building. As the gala approached, Kemi spent evenings poring over the evidence with Jordan, who coached her on maintaining composure. "He'll try to charm his way out," Jordan warned. "Don't let him. Stay focused." Kemi practiced her questions, her voice steady despite the storm inside. She thought of Mrs. Johnson, whose trust in Daniel had cost her security, and the families whose dreams he'd stolen. This wasn't just about her marriage. It was about justice for those he'd wronged. The night before the gala, Kemi stood before her bedroom mirror, the navy dress laid out on the bed. She traced the hospital bracelet still on her wrist, a symbol of the moment her world had cracked open. Daniel thought her weak, a Black janitor he could manipulate, but he'd underestimated her. The world saw her as less, but she was about to show them more. "They think I'm weak," she whispered, her reflection fierce with determination. "But they're about to see how strong I am." Kemi Afolabi stood before her mirror, her vow. "They think I'm weak, but they're about to see how strong I am," igniting a fire in her veins. Tonight at the law firm's charity gala, she would step into Daniel Carter's world of privilege and shatter his carefully crafted facade. The navy dress she'd chosen clung to her curves, its elegance a quiet defiance against the sneers that had long dismissed her as the Black janitor wife. The hospital bracelet still on her wrist was a reminder of the betrayal that had sparked this war, but also of her resilience. With Jordan Williams's legal arsenal, Amara's steady counsel, and Lydia's damning evidence, Kemi was no longer the victim. She was a strategist, ready to turn Daniel's stage into her battlefield, exposing his lies before the elite who adored him. The gala was held in a glittering downtown ballroom, its chandeliers casting a golden glow over tables draped in white linen. Kimmy entered on Daniel's arm, her smile practiced, her posture impeccable. The room buzzed with the city's power players, lawyers, executives, their spouses dripping in diamonds. Daniel, in a tailored tuxedo, radiated charm, shaking hands and basking in admiration. But Kimmy felt the weight of eyes on her, their whispers sharp as glass. "How does she compare to Rachel?" a woman murmured behind a champagne flute, her tone laced with pity. Another guest, a firm partner's wife, leaned in to whisper, "Daniel deserves someone more fitting, don't you think?" The words, cloaked in civility, cut at Kemi's race and occupation, branding her an outsider in this refined world. She let them slide, her focus razor-sharp on the plan. Daniel guided her to their table, his hand on her back a hollow gesture of affection. Kemi played her role, nodding at his small talk, her eyes scanning the room for Jordan. Rachel Brooks sat across the ballroom, her blonde hair swept into an elegant updo, her dress a shimmering red that screamed confidence. She caught Kemi's gaze briefly, her smile smug, unaware of the trap closing around her. The crowd settled as the MC introduced Daniel, praising his tireless commitment to community service. Kemi's stomach churned as he took the stage, his voice smooth as he spoke of the firm's charitable efforts, particularly the Community Trust for Immigrants. "We're here to give back," he said, his smile winning over the room. Kemi's fingers tightened around her clutch, the evidence within it burning like a weapon. As Daniel paused for applause, Kemi stood, her voice clear and steady. "Mr. Carter, could you share more about the trust's funding?" she asked, her tone innocent but piercing. "Where exactly are the donations going?" The room fell silent, heads turning toward her. Daniel's smile faltered, his eyes flickering with unease. "Well, it's a complex process," he began, his voice less assured. "But rest assured, every dollar supports our community." Kemi pressed on, her question sharper now. "Can you confirm the trust's recent allocations? Some families, like Mrs. Johnson's, haven't received their grants." The mention of Mrs. Johnson, a known figure in the community, sent a ripple through the crowd. Daniel stammered, his charm cracking under the weight of her words. Before he could recover, Jordan Williams stepped forward from the edge of the room, her presence commanding. In a tailored black suit, she held a folder thick with evidence. "If I may," Jordan said, her voice cutting through the tension, "I have documents that clarify Mr. Carter's contributions." She handed copies to the MC, who projected them onto a screen behind Daniel. The room gasped as the first document appeared, a loan agreement with Kemi's forged signature, tying her to debts she'd never approved. Next came emails between Daniel and Rachel, her words stark. "Move the trust money now. No one's watching." The final blow was a spreadsheet detailing thousands siphoned from the community trust into a hidden account. The crowd's murmurs grew into a storm of shock and outrage. Rachel leapt to her feet, her face pale. "This is a misunderstanding," she insisted, her voice trembling. "I had no idea about any of this." But Jordan was relentless, presenting a timeline of Rachel's social media posts, lavish dinners, designer gifts, aligned with the trust's missing funds. "You encourage Mr. Carter to steal," Jordan said, her tone icy, knowing exactly where the money came from. The evidence was undeniable, each document a nail in the coffin of their deceit. Daniel stood frozen, his face a mask of panic as colleagues turned on him, their whispers now accusations. "You stole from the community?" one demanded. "How could you?" another hissed. Rachel's attempts at denial faltered, her composure crumbling under the weight of truth. Kemi watched the chaos unfold, her heart steady despite the storm around her. The room that had once dismissed her as less than now saw the strength she'd hidden. The whispers that had branded her an outsider, her blackness, her job as a subway janitor, were drowned out by the evidence of her resolve. She caught Jordan's eye, a silent acknowledgement of their victory. The gala, meant to celebrate Daniel's success, had become his undoing, his hypocrisy laid bare before the elite he'd courted. Rachel's smug confidence had vanished, replaced by desperation as she faced the crowd's judgment. As the murmurs grew louder, Kemi rose from her seat, her navy dress catching the light. She walked toward the exit, her head high, every step a declaration of her power. Daniel called after her, his voice weak, but she didn't turn back. Outside in the cool night air, Jordan joined her, the folder still in hand. "You did it," Jordan said, her smile fierce with pride. Kemi met her gaze, her voice calm but resolute. "This is just the beginning." The gala had been her opening move, a public strike that exposed Daniel and Rachel's lies. But the war wasn't over. It was time to bring their crimes to court, to ensure justice for Mrs. Johnson and the community they'd betrayed. Kemi Afolabi stood outside the ballroom, her words to Jordan Williams, "This is just the beginning," echoing in the night air like a battle cry. The gala had been her opening strike, exposing Daniel Carter and Rachel Brooks to a stunned audience. But the real war would be fought in a courtroom. Kemi had dismantled their facade of respectability, and now with the law on her side, she would ensure they faced the consequences of their greed. The hospital bracelet on her wrist, a fading relic of her betrayal, felt like a talisman of her strength. As she prepared for the trial, Kemi knew this wasn't just about her marriage. It was about justice for Mrs. Johnson, for the community Daniel had robbed, and for the black woman the world had underestimated. The courtroom would be her battlefield, and she was ready to win. The trial began in a packed courthouse, the air thick with anticipation. Kemi sat in the front row, her navy dress replaced by a tailored blazer, her posture unyielding. Daniel stood at the defendant's table, his once confident demeanor frayed, his expensive suit unable to mask the strain in his eyes. Rachel, nearby, maintained a polished exterior, her blonde hair pulled tight, but her nervous glances betrayed her fear. The gallery was filled with community members, their faces a mix of anger and hope, many of whom had trusted Daniel with their futures. Mrs. Johnson, frail but resolute, sat beside Kemi, her presence a reminder of the stakes. Jordan Williams, commanding in a charcoal suit, stood ready to present a case built on months of meticulous evidence. Daniel's defense attorney opened with a strategy that made Kemi's blood boil. He painted Daniel as a misguided but well-intentioned lawyer, led astray by Rachel's influence. Then in a calculated move, he turned to Kemi, describing her as an uneducated black janitor who had misunderstood her husband's complex financial dealings. The words were a deliberate jab, meant to sway the jury by leaning into stereotypes about her race and occupation. "My client's wife lacked the sophistication to grasp his work," the attorney said, his tone dripping with condescension. Kemi felt the jury's eyes on her, some flickering with doubt, but she held her head high. Daniel's arrogance, mirrored in his lawyer's tactic, would be their downfall. Jordan countered with surgical precision. She presented a stack of legal documents, each one a dagger aimed at Daniel's lies. First came the loan agreements with Kemi's forged signature, tying her to debts she'd never consented to. Next were the emails between Daniel and Rachel, obtained lawfully by Claire, the former assistant. One email stood out, Rachel's words chilling, "The trust is easy money. No one's watching." Jordan followed with spreadsheets detailing $500,000 siphoned from the community trust, funds meant for families like Mrs. Johnson's. Claire took the stand, her voice steady despite her fear, confirming she'd accessed the emails through her authorized role at the firm. Each piece of evidence was airtight, admissible, and devastating, leaving no room for Daniel's charm to wiggle free. The courtroom's mood shifted when Mrs. Johnson testified. Her voice trembled as she described her trust in Daniel, built on his marriage to Kemi, one of our own. She recounted his words to her. "People like you should trust me because I understand your community better than she does." The statement, laced with racial superiority, hung heavy in the air. Mrs. Johnson explained how the loss of her stipend had forced her to skip medical treatments, her savings drained by Daniel's theft. Other victims followed, a young immigrant couple who'd lost their housing fund, a single mother whose child's education savings were gone. Their stories painted a vivid picture of the human cost of Daniel's greed, and the jury's faces hardened with each testimony. Daniel took the stand, his eloquence now a desperate weapon. He admitted to mistakes, but claimed Rachel had manipulated him, portraying himself as a victim of her ambition. He glanced at Kemi, his eyes pleading, but she met his gaze with unflinching resolve. His attempt to deflect blame faltered when Jordan cross-examined him, forcing him to confront the emails and spreadsheets. Did you believe your wife was too ignorant to notice? Jordan asked, her voice sharp. Daniel stammered, his arrogance exposed as a liability. The jury, once swayed by his charm, now saw a man who'd exploited his privilege to rob the vulnerable, his racial jab at Kemi backfiring spectacularly. Rachel's defense was equally futile. She claimed ignorance, insisting she was a pawn in Daniel's schemes. But Jordan's evidence crushed her narrative. The timeline of her lavish social media posts, designer bags, luxury trips, aligned perfectly with the trust's missing funds. Claire's testimony confirmed Rachel's active role, her emails urging Daniel to act. The jury saw through her polished facade, their whispers of disbelief echoing as Jordan laid bare her complicity. The courtroom, once a stage for Daniel's charisma, became a crucible where truth burned away their lies. After days of testimony, the verdict came swiftly. Daniel was convicted on multiple counts of financial fraud and embezzlement, sentenced to 7 years in federal prison, and ordered to pay $500,000 in restitution to his victims. Rachel received 4 years for her role as an accomplice, her dreams of wealth crumbling under the weight of justice. The judge awarded Kemi the majority of their marital assets, including the house, recognizing her as a victim of Daniel's deceit. The gallery erupted in murmurs of relief, community members embracing Mrs. Johnson, whose testimony had helped seal the case. Kemi stood outside the courthouse, the autumn air crisp against her skin. The hospital bracelet, now tucked in her pocket, was a relic of a life she'd left behind. Amara joined her, her nurse's calm replaced by fierce pride. "You didn't just win for yourself," Amara said, her eyes shining. Kemi nodded, the weight of the trial lifting from her shoulders. "I didn't just take back my life," she said, her voice steady with conviction. "I took back justice for all of us." The community Daniel had betrayed, the people he dismissed as beneath him, had found their voice through her fight. This victory was theirs as much as it was hers. Kemi Afolabi stood outside the courthouse, her words to Amara. "I didn't just take back my life. I took back justice for all of us," resonating like a vow fulfilled. The trial had stripped Daniel Carter and Rachel Brooks of their lies, delivering justice for Mrs. Johnson and the community they'd betrayed. But for Kemi, the victory was only the beginning of a new chapter. The house she'd shared with Daniel, once a symbol of love, now held only memories of deceit. She was ready to let it go, to build something of her own, a legacy rooted in pride, resilience, and service. With the restitution funds and her share of the marital assets, Kemi saw a path forward, not just for herself, but for the women and immigrants who, like her, had been dismissed by a world quick to judge. She would rise from the ashes of her past, stronger than ever. Kemi's first step was to sell the house. She met with a real estate agent, a no-nonsense woman named Ellen, who appraised the property at a value high enough to fund her dreams. Each room Kemi walked through felt like a ghost of her old life. The kitchen where she'd cooked for Daniel, the bedroom tainted by his betrayal. She signed the papers without hesitation, the ink drying on her decision to leave the past behind. The proceeds, combined with the court-ordered restitution, gave her a financial foundation to start anew. Kemi poured her energy into launching Afolabi Cleaning Services, a company built on her terms. She prioritized hiring Black women and immigrants, people whose labor was often undervalued, just as hers had been. The company's mission was clear: deliver unmatched quality while fostering pride in every employee. Setting up the business was no small feat. Kemi leased a small office downtown, its walls bare but brimming with possibility. She designed a logo, a bold, stylized broom encircled by a rising sun, symbolizing renewal. She hired her first employees, Tanya from her support group, whose steady hands belied the pain of her broken marriage, Maria, an immigrant mother who'd lost her savings to a scam, and Aisha, a young Black woman whose confidence reminded Kemi of her younger self. She trained them herself, emphasizing precision and dignity in their work. "We're not just cleaning," she told them, her voice firm. "We're building respect." The team responded with fierce loyalty, their shared experiences forging a bond stronger than any contract. Kemi's vision extended beyond her business. With Amara and Lydia, she founded the Afolabi Foundation for Women, a nonprofit dedicated to providing free legal and financial counseling to Black women facing injustice. Imara, with her nurses' compassion, took on outreach, connecting with community centers to spread the word. Lydia, ever the activist, leveraged her network to secure funding and partnerships. Kemi led the charge, drawing on her experience with Daniel's betrayal to guide women through their battles. The foundation offered workshops on spotting financial fraud, consultations with attorneys like Jordan Williams, and support groups where women could share their stories without fear. At one session, a woman named Denise spoke of her husband's dismissal. He said, "My job at the diner made me less than him." Kemi nodded, recognizing the echo of Daniel's disdain for her subway work, a prejudice rooted in race and class. The foundation's early days were challenging but rewarding. Kemi met with clients like Mrs. Johnson, whose recovered funds allowed her to afford medical care again. "You gave me my life back," the older woman said, her eyes wet with gratitude. Kemi shook her head. "You gave me strength, too." The foundation became a beacon, its name whispered in community centers and churches, a promise that no woman would face betrayal alone. Kemi, Amar, and Lydia worked late nights, their laughter and determination filling the office as they planned events and reviewed cases. Their trio was unstoppable, each woman's strengths amplifying the others, their shared mission a testament to the power of solidarity. The pinnacle of Kemi's transformation came when she secured a contract with the city's subway system, the very place where she'd once been mocked as just a Black janitor. The negotiation wasn't easy. The transit authority's manager, a man named Richard, initially hesitated, his tone clipped. "We need a team that's more professional," he said, his eyes avoiding hers, the implication clear. Her company, led by a Black woman and staffed by minorities, didn't fit his image of competence. Kemi didn't flinch. She presented a proposal detailing her team's training, efficiency, and commitment to excellence. A week later, she delivered a trial run, her crew transforming a grimy station into a spotless hub. Richard signed the contract, his reluctance replaced by grudging respect. Kemi had turned his prejudice into a victory. Standing at the subway station on the day the contract began, Kemi watched her team at work. Tanya scrubbing benches, Maria polishing rails, Aisha directing with quiet authority. The station, once a place of sneers and exhaustion, was now a symbol of her triumph. Passengers moved through, unaware of the woman who'd fought her way from betrayal to this moment. Kemi's heart swelled with pride, not just for herself but for the women beside her, each reclaiming their worth in a world that had tried to diminish them. Kemi's final stop was her new office, a modest space now filled with photos of her team and thank you notes from foundation clients. She stood at the window, the city's lights stretching before her, a canvas of possibility. The hospital bracelet was gone, replaced by a silver bangle, a gift from Amara to mark her new beginning. She thought of the neighbors who'd called her the janitor lady, the colleagues who'd whispered she didn't belong. "They thought I was just a Black janitor," she said to her reflection, her voice steady with conviction. "Now they'll see who I am." The story closed with Kemi leading her team, a beacon of strength and justice, her journey from ashes to triumph complete. Kemi Afolabi's journey from betrayal to triumph is a testament to resilience, proving that strength can rise from the ashes of injustice. Her story challenges us to confront prejudice and reclaim our power. What did Kemi's courage inspire in you? How did her fight against betrayal and societal bias resonate with your own experiences? We'd love to hear your thoughts. Share them in the comments below or on our social media, and let us know where you're listening from. Your reflections help build a community of voices united for justice. Thank you for joining us on this powerful journey. Your support means the world. Stay tuned for more stories of unbreakable spirits in the pursuit of truth. Until next time, keep standing tall and fighting for what's right. We'll see you soon.